The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Sarah Mitchell lay propped against starched pillows, her wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light as she turned the discharge papers over in her trembling hands. 3 weeks of recovery from emergency surgery had left her weak, but she was finally going home. Home to David, her husband of 12 years. Home to their Victorian house with the blue shutters and the garden she'd spent summers perfecting. The door opened with a soft click, and David entered, his face unreadable. He wasn't carrying the usual flowers or her favorite magazines. Instead, he held a manila folder and wore the expression she'd seen him use in business meetings when he was about to deliver bad news to competitors. "We need to talk," he said, settling into the plastic visitor's chair without kissing her forehead, as he had every day for the past 3 weeks. Sarah's stomach dropped. Something in his tone, in the way he avoided her eyes, sent alarm bells ringing through her chest. "What's wrong? Is everything okay at home?" David opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I sold the house." The words hit her like a physical blow. Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What did you say?" "The house is sold. I closed on it yesterday." He slid the papers across the hospital tray table toward her. "I needed the money." Sarah stared at the documents, her vision blurring as she tried to process what she was seeing. Sale agreements, transfer deeds, all bearing David's signature. Only David's signature. "How could you sell our house without my signature?" "I'm on the deed too, power of attorney. You signed it when you went into surgery, remember? For medical decisions if something went wrong." David's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. It covered financial matters too. The memory came flooding back. She'd been terrified she might not wake up from the surgery, had signed the papers through tears, trusting him completely to make decisions in her best interest if the worst happened. She'd never imagined he would use it against her. "David, what are you saying? Where are we going to live?" Her voice came out small, childlike. She hated how vulnerable she sounded, but shock had stripped away her defenses. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since entering the room, met her eyes directly. What she saw there made her blood run cold. There was no remorse, no love, no recognition of the woman he'd promised to cherish in sickness and in health. There was only calculation and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "We aren't going anywhere together. Sarah, I'm leaving you." The heart monitor beside her bed began beeping faster as her pulse spiked. "What? I've been seeing someone else. Someone who actually understands me, who doesn't nag me about my business decisions or expect me to check in every 5 minutes." He stood up, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. "Her name is Monica. She's younger, more successful, and she doesn't spend her days playing in dirt like some kind of gardening-obsessed housewife." Each word was a carefully placed dagger, designed to cause maximum damage. Sarah had always been proud of her garden, had even considered starting a landscape design business before David convinced her it would be a waste of time. The way he sneered when he said playing in dirt told her he'd never respected that part of her, had probably laughed about it with his new woman. "The money from the house sale is going toward our new place. A penthouse downtown. You'll have to figure out your own arrangements." He picked up the folder, leaving the sale documents on her tray table like a cruel parting gift. "I've already moved your things out. They're in storage unit 247 at Secure Space on Pine Street. The first month is paid. After that, it's your problem." Sarah's mouth opened and closed without sound. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of supporting his career, of hosting his business dinners and listening to his complaints about difficult clients. 12 years of putting his needs first, of believing they were building something together, and he was discarding her like she was nothing more than an outdated piece of furniture. "The divorce papers will be served once you're settled somewhere," he continued, his tone as casual as if he were leaving instructions for a house sitter. "My lawyer says it should be straightforward since we don't have kids, and most of our major assets are already separated now." He turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Oh, and Sarah, don't try to contest the house sale. The power of attorney was completely legal, and I have documentation of all my financial contributions to the purchase and maintenance. You won't win." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sterile room. Sarah sat in stunned silence, staring at the space where her husband had been moments before. Her husband, the man who'd held her hand through her father's funeral 2 years ago, who'd promised her that they'd face whatever came together. Hot tears began sliding down her cheeks as the full scope of his betrayal settled over her. He hadn't just left her. He'd systematically destroyed her security, her home, her future, all while she'd been fighting for her life in a hospital bed. The coldness of it, the calculated cruelty, was more devastating than any affair could have been. But beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir. A memory, fuzzy at first but growing clearer. Her father, Joseph Chen, sitting in his study just months before his death, his weathered hands folding a letter while he spoke to her about trust and preparation. "Sarah, my dear daughter," he'd said in his gentle accent, "I've learned in my 70 years that the people we trust most can sometimes surprise us in the worst ways. Promise me something. If I leave you a letter, read it when you truly need guidance. Not before, because you won't understand it until you're ready," she'd promised, thinking it was just another one of his philosophical moments. Her father had been full of wisdom and cryptic advice, a successful businessman who'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing and built a small empire through careful planning and incredible foresight. After his funeral, she'd found the letter in their safe deposit box, sealed in an envelope with her name and the words, "When you need me most," written in his careful handwriting. She'd been too grief-stricken to open it then, too focused on comforting her mother and handling the estate details. The letter had gone into her jewelry box at home, forgotten in the daily routine of life. But now, as she sat in this hospital bed with her world crumbling around her, those words echoed in her mind. "When you need me most. If that wasn't now, it would never be." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand and reached for the phone beside her bed. She dialed the number she'd memorized years ago but rarely used. "Chen Residence, this is Elena," came the familiar voice of her mother's housekeeper. "Elena, it's Sarah. Is my mother available?" "Oh, Miss Sarah. She's at her book club, but she'll be so happy you called. Are you feeling better after your surgery?" "Yes, much better. Elena, I need to ask a favor. Could you go to my old room and check if there's still a jewelry box on the dresser? I need something from inside it." "Of course, dear. Let me go look." Sarah waited, her heart pounding as she listened to Elena's footsteps echoing through the house where she'd grown up. The house her parents had bought when her father's import business finally took off, where family dinners had lasted for hours, and her father had taught her to play chess on rainy Sunday afternoons. "Yes, the jewelry box is still here." "What are you looking for?" "There should be a sealed envelope with my name on it. Could you bring it to me at Memorial Hospital? Room 314. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's important." "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there within the hour." The next 60 minutes crawled by like molasses. Sarah stared at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened while fighting off waves of panic about her immediate future. Where would she live? She had some savings, but not enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment. Her job at the nonprofit paid well enough when combined with David's income, but alone it would barely cover basic expenses. How long had he been planning this? The question tormented her. Had he been waiting for the perfect opportunity to destroy her life? Or had the power of attorney simply presented itself as too convenient to pass up? Either way, the level of premeditation was chilling. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Elena entered carrying a small gift bag, her kind face creased with concern. "You look pale, mija. Are you sure you're well enough to be worrying about old letters?" Sarah accepted the bag with trembling hands. "I think this letter might be exactly what I need right now." Elena squeezed her shoulder. "Your father was a wise man. Whatever he left for you, trust that he knew what he was doing." After Elena left, Sarah sat alone with the envelope in her lap. Her father's handwriting looked exactly the same as she remembered, precise and elegant. She turned it over and found it sealed with red wax, pressed with his signet ring. He'd taken this seriously, whatever it was. She broke the seal and unfolded 2 sheets of cream-colored paper. Her father's words, written in English but retaining the formal cadence of his first language, seemed to speak directly to her broken heart. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then you are facing a crisis that has shaken your faith in the people you trusted most. I am sorry I cannot be there to hold your hand through this darkness, but perhaps I can offer something better than comfort. I can offer you power. You know me as your father. But you knew only the man I became after arriving in America. Not the man who learned to survive when survival seemed impossible. I came to this country with nothing but determination and a hard-earned understanding that trust must be balanced with preparation. I learned to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. I have always seen in you my own spirit of resilience, but I also see your generous heart. You trust too easily, my daughter, and that is both your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability. I have spent years ensuring that if someone ever betrays that trust, you will have the tools not just to survive, but to reclaim your power. In the safe deposit box at First National Bank, you will find a second key. Box number 891. The contents will explain everything. But Sarah, remember this. True strength lies not in destruction, but in choosing how to use the power you possess. The choice will be yours alone. Be patient. Be clever. Be strong. But most importantly, be true to the values I tried to teach you. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in crushing your enemies, but in rising so far above them that their smallness becomes their own punishment. Your devoted father, Joseph Chen P.S. The second key is taped under the bottom drawer of my old desk in the study. Your mother never goes in there anymore. Elena will help you if you ask. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Her father had left her something more than just sentimental words. He'd left her actual resources, actual power, hidden away like a secret weapon for exactly this kind of betrayal. She thought about David's smug confidence as he'd laid out the destruction of her life. The way he'd spoken about documentation and legal precedents, so certain that he held all the cards. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. He thinks he's clever, she whispered to the empty room, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. He has no idea. The next morning, Sarah checked herself out of the hospital against the doctor's mild protests and took a taxi to her childhood home. Her mother was out at her weekly bridge game, giving Sarah the perfect opportunity to search her father's study undisturbed. The room hadn't changed since his death. Her mother had left everything exactly as it was, down to the half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk and the reading glasses folded beside his favorite fountain pen. Sarah ran her fingers over the familiar objects, drawing strength from the connection to the man who'd apparently seen this day coming long before she could have imagined. The desk was a massive mahogany, piece he'd bought when his business first became profitable. Sarah knelt beside it and felt along the underside of the bottom drawer until her fingers found the small metal object taped there, a bank key, brass and well-worn, with the number 891 etched into the head. An hour later, she sat in a private room at First National Bank while the elderly bank manager, Mr. Richardson, pulled out the contents of her father's secret safety deposit box. Your father was very specific about the instructions for this box, Richardson explained, his voice hushed with the reverence financial institutions reserve for their most valued clients. It was to be opened only by you, and only if you presented both keys and could answer a personal question that only his daughter would know. What's the question? What was the name of the goldfish he bought you for your 8th birthday? Sarah smiled. Mr. Whiskers. I named him that because his little barbells looked like whiskers, and my father thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Richardson nodded and opened the box. Inside were several manila folders, a thick envelope marked, My Dearest Sarah, and what looked like property deeds wrapped in ribbon. Sarah opened the envelope first and found herself staring at a cashier's check for $2.3 million, along with account information for 3 different banks and a letter of introduction to a law firm she'd never heard of. Chen, Martinez and Associates. I don't understand, she said, looking at Richardson. This is impossible. My father left everything to my mother in his will. Mr. Chen was very thorough in his estate planning. These assets were placed in an irrevocable trust in your name several years ago. They were never part of his general estate. Richardson handed her a business card. He said you should contact Martin Reyes at Chen, Martinez immediately upon opening this box. The first folder contained property deeds. Not just one property, but 4. A warehouse in the industrial district worth nearly $800,000. 2 rental properties that generated monthly income. And most shocking of all, a 40% stake in Chen Importing, the company her father had supposedly sold before his retirement. The second folder held stock certificates and investment account statements. Her father hadn't just left her money. He'd left her a carefully constructed financial empire that had been growing quietly for years. The third folder made her hands shake as she opened it. Inside were private investigator reports, financial records, and photographs. David's face stared back at her from surveillance photos taken outside a downtown restaurant. He was holding hands with a brunette woman Sarah didn't recognize, both of them laughing as they entered what looked like an expensive hotel. The reports were dated 6 months before her surgery. Her father had known about David's affair and had been documenting it systematically. Bank records showed unusual spending patterns, expensive gifts charged to credit cards that Sarah had never seen the benefits of, hotel bills and jewelry purchases that had certainly never made it home to her. At the bottom of the folder was a note in her father's handwriting. "I am sorry to be the one to show you this truth, but knowledge is power, and you will need every advantage." Sarah sat back in the leather chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what her father had prepared for her. He'd seen her husband's true nature long before she had, and had quietly built her a fortress of financial security. But more than that, he'd given her the evidence she needed to understand exactly what kind of man she'd been married to. "Mr. Richardson," she said finally, "I need to call that lawyer immediately." Martin Reyes was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and her father's same careful attention to detail. His office was understated but clearly expensive, the kind of place that whispered competence rather than shouted it. "Your father spoke of you often," he said, as Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk. "He was very proud of your compassion and your strength, but he worried that those very qualities might make you vulnerable to those with less honorable intentions. You knew about David. I knew about David's character, long before we had evidence of his specific actions. Your father had good instincts about people. He asked me to prepare for several contingencies, including the one that has apparently come to pass." Reyes opened a thick file on his desk. "Your father's instructions were very clear. If you ever needed these resources because of betrayal or abandonment, I was to help you understand not just what you now own, but how to use it strategically." "Strategically?" "Your husband believes he has destroyed your security and left you powerless. Your father's gift isn't just financial resources, Sarah. It's the opportunity to allow him to believe that while you quietly take control of your own future." Reyes spread several documents across his desk. "The warehouse property, for instance, is currently leased to a logistics company at below-market rates. We can terminate that lease and either find better tenants or convert the space for other uses. The rental properties are both in desirable neighborhoods and could support significant rent increases. And your stake in Chen Importing gives you voting rights in a company that's been growing steadily since your father's supposed retirement." Sarah studied the papers, her mind racing. "My father never retired, did he?" "Not exactly. He restructured the company to operate more efficiently and transferred operational control to his partner, but he maintained significant ownership through various trusts and holdings. You're now one of the primary beneficiaries of that foresight." The numbers were staggering. Between the properties, the business interests, and the investment accounts, her father had left her assets worth over $8 million. She wasn't just financially secure, she was wealthy. "What did my father want me to do with all this?" Reyes smiled. "He wanted you to have choices, Sarah. Real choices based on your own values and goals, not desperation or dependence. But he also left specific suggestions for how you might handle someone who had betrayed you as thoroughly as your husband has." He handed her another folder. "These are the companies and properties your husband has been involved with over the past 2 years. Your father's investigators were very thorough." Sarah opened the folder to find detailed financial records of David's business dealings. What she saw made her stomach churn. David hadn't just been cheating on her emotionally and physically. He'd been systematically stealing from joint accounts, transferring money to personal accounts she'd never known about, even taking out loans using their home as collateral without her knowledge. "He's been planning this for at least 2 years, she said, the betrayal cutting deeper as the scope of his deception became clear. "It appears so. But Sarah, here's where your father's preparation becomes particularly valuable. Several of these transactions your husband completed illegally. He forged your signature on documents, used the power of attorney outside its legal scope, and in some cases, outright committed fraud." Reyes leaned forward, his expression serious. "We could destroy him completely if you chose to pursue criminal charges, but your father's final instructions were very specific about this. He said the choice of how to respond should be entirely yours, and that you should take time to decide what kind of person you want to be when this is over." Sarah closed the folder and sat back in her chair. The power she now held was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She could crush David, leave him facing criminal charges and financial ruin. She could make him pay for every moment of humiliation and betrayal. But something in her father's words echoed in her mind. True strength lies not in destruction, but in choosing how to use the power you possess. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course. But Sarah, there's one more thing your father wanted you to know immediately. Your husband's current lifestyle is unsustainable. According to our financial analysis, he's living far beyond his means and accumulating debt rapidly. The money he got from selling your house won't last more than 8 months at his current spending rate." "What do you mean?" "The penthouse he moved into costs $8,000 per month. His new girlfriend has expensive tastes in cars, jewelry, and travel. He's been taking her on elaborate vacations, buying her gifts that cost more than most people make in a month. Meanwhile, his own business has been losing clients due to his increased distraction and some questionable ethical decisions." Reyes showed her a financial projection that painted a stark picture. If he continues on his current trajectory, he'll be facing bankruptcy within a year, possibly sooner. The house sale proceeds are his only significant asset, and he's burning through them at an alarming rate. Sarah stared at the numbers, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "You're saying I don't need to destroy him?" "He's destroying himself, exactly. Your father's suggestion was that you might want to simply protect yourself and let natural consequences take their course. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping out of the way and watching someone's poor choices catch up to them." But even as Reyes spoke, Sarah was thinking beyond simple revenge. An idea was taking shape, something that would honor her father's memory while giving her life new purpose. The warehouse, the business connections, the financial resources, they weren't just tools for payback. They were the foundation for something meaningful. "I want to convert the warehouse," she said suddenly, "into something that helps people. A community center, maybe, or a place that provides services to families in crisis." Reyes smiled. "Your father thought you might say something like that. He included a provision in the trust specifically to support charitable uses of the properties. There are significant tax advantages to that kind of conversion, and it would create a lasting legacy in his honor." "What about David? What happens when he realizes what he's lost?" "That's up to you, Sarah. You can reveal everything now, or you can wait and see what choices he makes when his world starts falling apart. But either way, you'll be making that choice from a position of strength, not desperation." Sarah left the lawyer's office with her head spinning, but her heart lighter than it had been since walking into that hospital room. She wasn't the helpless, abandoned woman David thought he'd left behind. She was her father's daughter, with her father's strength and her father's resources, and most importantly, her father's wisdom about the difference between justice and vengeance. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah quietly settled into a furnished apartment near downtown, using cash from one of her father's accounts to avoid any paper trail David might try to follow. She told no one except Martin Reyes where she was staying, and spent her days planning the conversion of the warehouse and researching the best ways to create a community resource center. Meanwhile, her private investigator sent regular reports about David's increasingly lavish lifestyle. The man who had coldly calculated her destruction was living like a lottery winner, apparently believing his financial situation was secure indefinitely. He'd bought Monica a new BMW, taken her on a week-long cruise to the Caribbean, and was throwing elaborate dinner parties at the penthouse for his business associates. Sarah read the reports with a mixture of disgust and amazement. This was the man who had lectured her about financial responsibility, who had criticized every small purchase she made for their home. But the reports also revealed cracks in his perfect new life. Monica was demanding more expensive gifts, complaining to friends that David wasn't as wealthy as she'd initially believed. His business was losing clients who were put off by his increasingly erratic behavior and obvious distraction. Several deals had fallen through when David failed to follow up appropriately. Too busy planning his next romantic gesture, most tellingly, He'd started making inquiries about selling some business assets he didn't actually own, items that were still technically joint property, despite the divorce proceedings not being finalized. Martin Reyes intercepted these attempts through carefully placed contacts, preventing David from committing additional fraud, while documenting his attempts for future use if needed. "He's getting desperate," Reyes reported during one of their weekly meetings. "The house money is disappearing faster than he anticipated, and Monica's spending is accelerating. She's apparently told friends that she expects him to propose soon, preferably with a ring that costs at least $50,000. Sarah shook her head in amazement. He has no idea what he's gotten himself into. "The pattern is classic," Reyes observed. "Men who abandon their wives for younger women often discover that younger women have much more expensive expectations. He's trying to prove his worth through material displays, and it's bankrupting him." "What about the business? Is he really losing clients?" 3 major accounts in the past month. Word in his industry is that David Mitchell has become unreliable and unprofessional. Some of his former clients have even reached out to competitors, specifically asking for someone who still takes business seriously. Sarah felt a twinge of satisfaction at this news. David had always prided himself on his professional reputation. His business success had been the foundation of his arrogance, his justification for looking down on her simple interests in gardening and community work. To see that crumbling due to his own choices felt like poetic justice. But her satisfaction was tempered by the larger plan taking shape in her mind. The community center was becoming more than just an idea. It was becoming a calling. She'd spent hours walking through the warehouse district, imagining how the space could be transformed into something that would genuinely help families in crisis. The area was in transition, with young families moving into renovated lofts and older residents struggling with rising costs and changing demographics. There were few resources for childcare, job training, or family counseling. Her father's warehouse could become a hub for all of those services and more. "I want to move forward with the community center," she told Reyes during their 3rd-week meeting. "How quickly can we make that happen?" "The legal conversion can be completed within 60 days if you're certain." "But Sarah, once we announce this project, your financial situation will become more visible. David will realize that you're not the broken, helpless woman he left behind." Sarah considered this. Part of her had been enjoying the secret knowledge of her true situation, the way David's arrogance would blind him to any possibility that she might have resources he didn't know about. But another part of her was ready to stop hiding, to step fully into the life her father had made possible. "Let's do it. But I want to make the announcement in a specific way." She outlined her plan to Reyes, who listened with growing admiration and occasional chuckles. It wasn't cruel, but it was definitely strategic, designed to reveal the truth at the moment when it would have maximum impact on David's understanding of what he had actually lost. The announcement appeared in the business section of the city's newspaper on a Thursday morning. "Local woman honors late father with community center development." The article described Sarah Chen Mitchell's plans to convert a warehouse into a comprehensive family resource center, funded by a substantial inheritance from her father's estate. The article mentioned the estimated cost of the renovation, $1.2 million, and the ongoing operational budget that would be supported by income from other inherited properties. It quoted Sarah as saying, "My father taught me that true wealth comes from helping others build better lives. This center will be his lasting legacy to our community." The article didn't mention was that Sarah had timed its publication to coincide with what her private investigator had informed. Her would be a particularly difficult day for David. Monica had apparently issued an ultimatum the night before: propose with an appropriately expensive ring by the weekend, or she was moving on to someone who appreciated her worth. Sarah was having coffee in her temporary apartment when her phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID, and she let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. After the 5th call in 10 minutes, she answered. "Hello, David." "What the hell is this article in the paper?" His voice was tight with anger and what sounded like panic. "I'm not sure what you mean. Could you be more specific?" "Don't play games with me, Sarah. This article about some inheritance from your father, that's impossible. I know exactly what he left when he died. Your mother got the house and some savings. There was nothing else." Sarah kept her voice level and calm. "I'm surprised you paid such close attention to my father's estate." You never seemed very interested in my family when he was alive. Answer the question. Where did this money come from? My father was more thorough in his planning than any of us realized. He apparently wanted to ensure I would be taken care of if anything ever happened to my marriage. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When David spoke again, his voice had changed from angry to calculating. How much are we talking about here, Sarah? Because if this is community property, then I'm entitled to half of whatever you inherited. Sarah almost laughed out loud at the audacity of the statement. The man who had stolen from their joint accounts, forged her signature, and abandoned her in a hospital bed was now trying to claim a share of resources he had never known existed. Actually, David, the inheritance was placed in an irrevocable trust in my name several years ago. It was never marital property, but I'm sure your lawyer can explain the details when you decide to contest it. You're bluffing. Your father was a small-time importer who sold his business and retired. He didn't have millions to leave anyone. I'm not going to argue with you about my father's financial situation. I have work to do on the community center. Was there anything else you needed? Sarah, wait. Listen, maybe we've both made some mistakes here. Maybe we should talk about this in person. See if we can work things out. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable now. Sarah could practically hear the calculations running through his head as he realized that his abandoned wife might not be the financially helpless victim he'd intended to leave behind. I don't think that's a good idea. David, you were very clear about your feelings when you left me in that hospital room. I think it's better if we communicate through our lawyers from now on. Sarah, please. Let's just meet for coffee. There are things you don't understand about why I made the choices I did. Maybe if you knew the whole story. I know enough of the story. David, I know about Monica, about the money you've been taking from our accounts, about the loans you took out against our house without my knowledge. I know more than you think I do. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, less certain. We were married for 12 years, Sarah. That has to count for something. Yes, it does count for something. It counts for a very painful lesson about the difference between the person I thought I married and the person you actually are. She ended the call and turned off her phone, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. It hadn't been as satisfying as she'd anticipated. Instead of feeling powerful, she felt sad for both of them. For the woman she'd been who had trusted so completely, and for the man he'd become who could calculate her destruction so coldly. But beneath the sadness was something stronger. Relief. She'd passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. When given the opportunity to twist the knife, to reveal just how completely she could destroy him now, she'd chosen restraint. Her father would have been proud. Over the next 2 weeks, the community center project gained momentum and local media attention. Sarah gave interviews about her vision for the space, describing plans for childcare services, job training programs, and counseling resources. She was careful to present herself as someone honoring her father's legacy, rather than someone seeking attention for her own generosity. Meanwhile, her private investigators' reports painted an increasingly desperate picture of David's situation. Monica had not been impressed by his claims about future legal battles over Sarah's inheritance. When he couldn't produce the promised engagement ring by her deadline, she'd moved out of the penthouse and begun dating someone else, someone whose wealth was more immediately visible and reliable. David had responded by throwing himself into increasingly frantic attempts to generate quick income. He'd tried to accelerate business deals, offering discounts that destroyed his profit margins. He'd attempted to sell personal property at far below market value. He'd even approached several of Sarah's friends, suggesting they might want to invest in his business ventures. The friends had called Sarah to warn her about these approaches, expressing concern about David's apparent financial desperation and erratic behavior. Sarah thanked them for their loyalty, while privately marveling at how completely David had misunderstood the social dynamics of their former life together. Her friends had always been politely tolerant of him for her sake. They'd never actually liked or trusted him. He came to my office yesterday, her friend Jennifer reported during one of their lunch meetings. He kept talking about temporary setbacks and big opportunities. But Sarah, he looked terrible. Like he hadn't slept in days, and he was wearing the same suit I saw him in last week. Sarah felt a complicated mix of emotions at this news. The vindictive part of her was satisfied to hear that David's arrogance was finally meeting reality, but the part of her that had once loved him felt genuine concern for his obvious distress. Did he say anything specific about his situation? He mentioned some problems with his business, said he was in between apartments while looking for something better. But Sarah, the way he talked about you, it was strange. He seemed to think you were going to take him back, that this whole community center thing was some kind of elaborate gesture to win his attention. This was news to Sarah. She'd had no contact with David since their phone conversation 2 weeks earlier, despite several attempts on his part to reach her. She'd assumed his silence meant he was focused on solving his financial problems rather than pursuing reconciliation. He really thinks I'm doing this for him? That's how it sounded to me. Like he couldn't believe you would do something significant without it being somehow about him. It was actually kind of sad, how completely he missed the point of what you're trying to accomplish. Sarah considered this information as she walked back to her apartment after lunch. David's narcissism had always been one of his most unattractive qualities, but she'd never realized how deeply it affected his perception of reality. He literally couldn't imagine that her actions might have nothing to do with him. That evening, as she was reviewing architectural plans for the warehouse renovation, her doorbell rang. She checked the security monitor and saw David standing in the hallway, holding what looked like flowers. She considered not answering, but something in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged, the obvious exhaustion in his stance, made her reconsider. Perhaps it was time for the conversation that would close this chapter of both their lives. She opened the door, but kept the security chain attached, creating a gap just wide enough for conversation. "Hello, David." He looked even worse than Jennifer had described. His expensive suit was wrinkled and didn't fit quite right, as if he'd lost weight. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Sarah, thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would." He held up the flowers, grocery store roses that looked like they'd been purchased as an afterthought. "I brought these for you." "That's thoughtful, but I'm not really accepting gifts right now. Please, Sarah. I just need 5 minutes. There are things I need to explain, things I need you to understand about what happened." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself curious about what explanation he could possibly offer for his behavior. She unlatched the chain and stepped back to let him enter. David walked into her small apartment and looked around with obvious surprise. The furnished space was comfortable but modest. Nothing like the luxury he'd probably expected given the newspaper coverage of her inheritance. "This isn't what I imagined," he said, setting the roses on her kitchen counter. "What did you imagine?" "I don't know. Something more substantial. If you have millions now, why are you living like this?" Sarah almost smiled at the question. It revealed so much about how he viewed wealth and status. "I'm living like this because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. This apartment suits my current needs." David sat heavily on her couch, looking older than his 45 years. "Sarah, I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Which mistake would that be? Selling our house while I was in the hospital? Moving in with another woman? Or stealing from our joint accounts for 2 years?" His head snapped up at the last item. "How did you know about the money?" "I know about all of it, David. The forged signatures, the unauthorized loans, the gifts you bought Monica with money you took from accounts I contributed to." "I know everything." The color drained from his face. "Sarah, I can explain all of that. I was going to pay it back. The business deals I was working on, they would have covered everything and more." "What business deals?" "According to my information, you've lost most of your major clients in the past 2 months." David stared at her with growing realization. "You've been having me investigated. I've been protecting myself, which is something I should have started doing long before you decided to destroy our marriage." He buried his face in his hands. "This is all wrong. This isn't how any of this was supposed to happen." "How was it supposed to happen, David? In your version of events, what was the acceptable outcome of your betrayal?" "I never meant to hurt you. I know that sounds impossible to believe, but it's true. Monica and I, we just connected in a way that you and I never did. She understood my ambitions, my drive to succeed. She made me feel like I could accomplish anything." Sarah sat down in the chair across from him, studying the man she'd once planned to grow old with. "And I didn't make you feel that way? You were always so content with small things. Your garden, your nonprofit work, quiet evenings at home. I needed someone who wanted more, who pushed me to achieve more. So you decided to take everything I had worked for and use it to impress her. The house was an investment we made together, but I was the one making the mortgage payments. The other money, I thought of it as advances against my future earnings. I really did plan to pay it back. Sarah shook her head in amazement. David, do you hear yourself? You're talking about our marriage like it was a business partnership that you decided to dissolve. You took money that belonged to both of us to finance a relationship with another woman, and you think your intentions somehow make that acceptable? No, you're right. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. His voice cracked slightly. But Sarah, Monica is gone. She left me the minute things got difficult. She never cared about me the way you did. She only cared about what I could give her. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm not sure what you expect from me. David looked up at her with desperate hope in his eyes. I want us to try again. I want to fix this. The audacity of the request took Sarah's breath away. You want to fix this? Yes. I know it won't be easy, and I know you don't trust me right now. But we had 12 good years together before I lost my way. That has to count for something. David, you didn't lose your way. You made deliberate choices over and over again for at least 2 years. You chose to have an affair. You chose to steal from our joint accounts. You chose to plan my abandonment while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. Those weren't momentary lapses in judgment. They were calculated decisions that revealed who you really are. People can change, Sarah. I can change. Can you? Because right now you're still trying to manipulate me. You're not here because you've realized the depth of your betrayal and want to make amends. You're here because your life fell apart and you've discovered that I'm not as helpless as you thought I'd be. David's facade finally cracked completely. Yes, okay, you're right. I'm here because I have nothing left. Monica cleaned out my accounts before she left. The penthouse lease was in her name and she kicked me out. I'm staying in a motel and I can barely afford that. My business is falling apart, and I have debts I can't pay. And you thought I would rescue you? I thought maybe we could rescue each other. You have resources now, but you're alone. I made mistakes, but I still know how to build a business, how to manage investments. We could be partners again, real partners this time. Sarah stood up, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. David, I need you to leave now. Sarah, please, no. You need to leave, and you need to understand something very clearly. I am not alone. I have friends who care about me, work that matters to me, and plans for my future that don't depend on anyone else's approval or support. I don't need to be rescued, and I certainly don't need to be saved by the man who tried to destroy me. David rose slowly from the couch. What about forgiveness, Sarah? What about the vows we made? You broke those vows long before I did. But David, I do forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger is too heavy a burden for me to bear. I forgive you, but that doesn't mean I trust you. And it doesn't mean I want you in my life. He walked to the door, then turned back one last time. The community center, the way you're helping people. You're doing that to prove something to me, aren't you? To show me what I lost? Sarah looked at him with genuine pity. David, this is exactly why we can't fix this. Even now, even after everything that's happened, you still think everything I do is about you. The community center is about honoring my father's legacy and helping families who are struggling. It has nothing to do with you. After he left, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment and thought about the conversation. There had been a time when seeing David so broken would have filled her with either satisfaction or sympathy. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. The man she'd been married to had never really existed. She'd loved a version of David that had been partially her own creation, built from hope and selective perception. The real David was the one who had just left her apartment, someone who could justify any action as long as it served his immediate needs, who could calculate the destruction of another person's security and call it pragmatism. She was grateful to finally see him clearly, even if the clarity came at such a painful cost. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the center of her converted warehouse, watching contractors put the finishing touches on what would become the Chen Family Resource Center. The transformation was remarkable. Warm lighting, colorful murals painted by local artists, spaces designed specifically for children's activities, job training, and family counseling. The grand opening was scheduled for the following week. with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by the mayor and several city council members. Local media had followed the project closely, impressed by both the scope of the renovation and Sarah's vision for comprehensive family services. But today, she was alone in the space with just her thoughts and the echoes of construction noise. She pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken throughout the renovation process, documenting each stage of the transformation from empty warehouse to community hub. Her phone buzzed with a text from Martin Reyes. Saw the preview article in today's paper. Your father would be incredibly proud. How are you feeling about everything? She typed back, grateful, excited, ready to see families use this space. A moment later, another text. Any word from David lately? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. No, and I hope it stays that way. I heard from Jennifer that he moved back to his hometown to live with his brother while he tries to rebuild his life. I genuinely hope he finds a way to be happy that doesn't involve hurting other people. It was true. The anger she'd carried for months had gradually transformed into something closer to indifference. David's choices had revealed his character, but they had also revealed her own strength. She'd discovered that she could survive betrayal, could build something meaningful from the ashes of her old life, and could choose grace over revenge, even when revenge would have been justified. The community center's first week exceeded all expectations. Families began using the childcare services immediately, allowing single parents to attend job training sessions in the same building. The counseling services had a waiting list within days. Children's laughter filled the space during after-school programs, and evening adult education classes were standing room only. Sarah found herself working longer hours than she ever had at her nonprofit job, but the work energized rather than exhausted her. This wasn't just a career. It was a calling that had grown out of her father's wisdom and her own hard-earned understanding of what it meant to face crisis and emerge stronger. 3 months after the opening, she received an unexpected phone call. Sarah, it's David. She nearly hung up immediately, but something in his tone made her pause. He sounded different, quieter, less certain of his right to her attention. What can I do for you, David? I saw the news coverage of the community center. It looks incredible. You should be really proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you. I am proud of it. I also wanted you to know that I'm getting help. Therapy, I mean? My brother convinced me that I needed to understand why I made the choices I did, why I was willing to hurt someone I claimed to love. Sarah was quiet for a moment, uncertain how to respond. I'm glad you're doing that work. I'm not calling to ask for anything, Sarah. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance or even friendship. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I destroyed, and I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. I appreciate that, David. Can I ask you something? When you built the community center, when you made the decision to help other families instead of using your resources to hurt me the way I hurt you, was that hard? The choice to be generous instead of vengeful? Sarah considered the question carefully. It wasn't hard, David. It was the only choice that felt like me. Revenge would have turned me into someone I wouldn't recognize, someone my father wouldn't have recognized. The community center honors both his memory and the person I want to be. I think I understand that now. I think that's what I lost when I lost you. The chance to be the better version of myself that you saw in me. You can still be that person, David, just not with me. After the call ended, Sarah sat in her office at the community center, surrounded by photos of families who had been helped by the programs she'd created. There was the single mother who had completed her nursing degree using the center's childcare services, the teenager who had learned job skills that helped him support his younger siblings, the elderly couple who had found community and purpose volunteering with the children's programs. These were the victories that mattered now. Not the satisfaction of David's downfall, but the building of something that would outlast all of them. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out the framed photo of her father that sat beside her computer. His kind eyes seemed to twinkle with the same gentle humor she remembered from childhood. I chose justice, but not cruelty, she said softly to the photograph. That was your last lesson, Papa. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not revenge at all. Outside her office window, she could see children playing in the center's courtyard, their voices mixing with the sounds of adults attending evening classes and support group meetings. The warehouse that had once stored imported goods now housed something far more valuable: hope, opportunity, and second chances. Sarah had learned that betrayal could destroy a life, but it could also reveal possibilities that would never have existed otherwise. Her father's secret gift hadn't just been financial security. It had been the chance to discover her own strength and choose her own values when everything else was stripped away. The phone rang again, but this time it was Jennifer calling to confirm their dinner plans. "How was your day?" Jennifer asked when Sarah answered. "Perfect," Sarah replied, and realized she meant it completely. Absolutely perfect. As she locked up the community center that evening and walked to her car, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a woman whose identity was largely defined by her relationship to others: daughter, wife, employee. Now she was a woman who had chosen her own path, built something meaningful with her own hands and heart, and learned the difference between justice and revenge. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of her story had actually been the beginning of a new chapter, one written entirely in her own voice, guided by her father's wisdom, but shaped by her own choices. David had been right about one thing: people could change. She was living proof of that truth. The woman who had been abandoned in a hospital bed had become someone who could build hope from heartbreak, who could choose grace over bitterness, who could transform her father's legacy into something that would help countless families build better lives. As she drove through the city, streets toward her new apartment, a larger space she'd finally purchased after months in temporary housing, Sarah smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the community center, new families to help, new programs to develop. It would be a good day, made better by the knowledge that she had chosen to become exactly the person her father had raised her to be. Sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in defeating your enemies, but in rising so far above their level that their actions became irrelevant to your happiness. Sarah had learned that lesson well, and she carried it forward into whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she would meet future challenges with the same combination of strength, wisdom, and grace that had carried her through the darkest period of her life. The betrayal within her marriage had ended, but the strength within herself would last forever.